Hello, welcome to another edition of VLGA Connect. I'm Chris Eddy. Good to have your company, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to us on your podcast player. Our thanks to Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, who sponsor this weekly program, looking at what's happening around the local government sector in Victoria, sometimes a little beyond. Great reaction to last week's episode where we dissected the Hepburn Shire issue, as well as spoke to Kristen Desmond down in West Tamar in Tasmania about their use of AI. Thanks for your comments and support for last week's program. What do we have for you this week? Well, Victorian Electoral Commissioner Sven Blumal is here to set the scene for this year's state election. We'll hear how the VEC is preparing to run that election while a number of council by-elections are taking place as well. And we'll meet the CEO of Moira Shire Council, Matthew Morgan, on his thought leadership about the sector and how things are travelling at the only Victorian council currently under administration and preparing to return to elected representation in 2028. But first up, here are the week's headline news stories in Connect News. Well, first up this week, there are reports that Victoria's rate cap framework may be overhauled. Senior government sources have told the Herald Sun that local government minister Paul Hamer is considering a major carve-out for council wages, allowing councils to pass staff pay rises directly onto ratepayers. While some suggest the move is an effort to shore up critical union support ahead of internal party leadership pressures, a review of the rate cap has been welcomed by MAV President Councillor Jennifer Anderson. A final proposal could go to Cabinet as early as Monday. Wyndham City Council has appointed a new leader to the top job this week following the resignation of Councillor Preet Singh earlier in the week. Councillor Singh announced his decision in a video posted to social media on Tuesday morning following months of calls for his resignation. Councillor Mia Shaw, a former mayor and current VLGA board member, returns to the role she held last year, while Councillor Jasmine Hill will continue her service as Deputy Mayor. Councillor Shaw is set to lead the municipality for the balance of the mayoral term, which is due to conclude this November. And another mayor has resigned. Macedon Ranges Shire Mayor Kate Kendall is stepping away from the mayoralty, effective close of business today as we record this, Friday the 24th of July. Councillor Kendall says she's stepping down to contest the state seat of Macedon at the upcoming Victorian election in November. She'll remain on council as a ward councillor. Whittlesea City Council has appointed a new leader to the organisation's top job. At its July meeting, councillors endorsed Dan Hogan for the role, with his term set to begin on the 1st of September. He arrives with a distinguished two-decade career in the sector, having previously held senior leadership roles at the City of Melton, Brimbank City Council, and his current role at the City of Kingston. Cardinia Shire Council has endorsed the retention of the creche service at Cardinia Life following a wave of community advocacy in support of the facility. While the sector faces significant compliance hurdles and shifts in usage, councillors have opted to keep the doors open while the future operational model is evaluated. The administration will investigate potential partnership opportunities and grant funding to improve the program's financial viability and long-term sustainability. And Ballarat City Council will keep running its family daycare service, voting to continue the scheme for the next 3 years, a full review due by the 30th of September 2029. A council review found educator numbers have steadily declined over the past decade, with the program now operating with 3 educators supporting around 44 children from 32 families. Despite the smaller scale, community feedback strongly backed the service. 7 mayors from Victoria's Murray-Darling Basin irrigation communities are calling for an urgent meeting with state ministers over buyback compensation. The Murray River Group of Councils and Greater Shepparton City Council say the Victorian Government should pause current negotiations on the Basin Sustainable Communities Fund and work with local councils to co-design tailored plans for each municipality. They say they've requested a meeting with Ministers Shing and Settle and are hoping for a response by the end of the week. And Yarriambiack Shire Council has completed 7 new energy-efficient housing units across 5 townships to provide downsizing options for older residents and address local worker accommodation shortages. Backed by $2.8 million in state government funding, the council has appointed local not-for-profit Dunmunkle Lodge to manage the portfolio under a 50-year lease. The project forms part of a broader municipal housing strategy, with further residential land subdivisions currently progressing in Murtoa, Rapanyup and Hopeton. That's VLGA Connect news for this week. For more on these stories and more, listen to the Local Government News Roundup podcast, sponsored by the VLGA and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Well, the Victorian Electoral Commission administers elections for all 79 Victorian councils on a 4-yearly basis, but in the meantime, it keeps itself busy with some other small tasks like a state election, which is now less than 5 months away. This is the biggest electoral preparation cycle in years for the VEC, and we'd like to find out a bit more about the challenges that presents with the Electoral Commissioner, Sven Bluemmel, joining us on the program today. Hello, Sven. Great to have you back.
Hello, Chris. Nice to be here.
How have you been? How are you getting through our rather bitterly cold winter that's descended upon us?
Yeah, how have we been? We've been really well at the VEC, but also very, very busy. We're very much in the ramp up to the state election on the 28th of November. In terms of getting through the cold, we now actually have some long-term centralised activity facilities close to Melbourne, rather than renting facilities like the showgrounds or the convention centre. And I'm very pleased to say that at least the office space that I'm in, which I'm in right now, is actually heated. So
very good.
we're doing well.
It sounds like that might not have always been the case. So
No.
as the election is approaching, just take us inside what it looks like at the VSE as you plan for this. As you've said, one of the biggest electoral preparation cycles you've seen in your time.
Well, and certainly it by pretty much every measure will be the biggest election ever run in Victoria. I mean, we're hoping to have about 4.6 million voters. Obviously, the register of electors due to the population keeps growing, and of course we're ready for that. We're going to have a workforce of probably about a bit over 25,000 people that it actually takes to deliver an election, which again scales with the scale of the task. That's obviously across the state. Many of those may only work for us for one day, but others will work for us for weeks and even months ahead of and even beyond election day. For us, that's really critical because all of those people they're our front line. They do really important work. They interact with the community, and we need to select them. We need to train them. We need to give them support. We need to give them products that they can refer to when things come up. Now, of course, we always do that, but the task keeps getting bigger and more complex. But we're ready.
So areas that intersect with local government, we'll talk about candidates, councillors perhaps running shortly, and the fact that you've got to run some by-elections on the side here as well in a moment. But venue planning, this is an important area, I understand, where you do intersect with councils and you'd like to work pretty closely with them in the lead up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we do work very closely with councils. We've got generally a very good relationship with councils, which is of course exactly what we need from both sides of that equation. The scale of the venue footprint that we're talking about here, I mean, apart from our central activities like our head office, our centralised activity here that I'm speaking to you from now, we're going to have over 200 early voting centres that operate from the Wednesday 10 days before election day through to the Friday immediately before election day. We're making some changes in that regard. Listening to feedback, for example, a lot of those early voting centres will actually be joint early voting centres. So what we mean by that is that you'll be able to go there and vote locally for that relevant lower house district, but you'll also be able to vote there much more easily for some adjoining district or even districts, rather than having to go through a separate channel for out of district voting. There'll just be one, or in some cases several issuing points for an adjacent district where we are expecting a lot of traffic from an adjacent district. We obviously do a lot of very data heavy analysis in that regard. So that's a big change. So that's about 200 or over 200 early voting centres, which will be open for about 10 days. On election day, we'll have a total of about 1,750, which includes those 200, because for the first time, all of our early voting centres are turning into election day voting centres. Right. Haven't always had that.
has led to some confusion. You might have been driving past your early voting centre and go, oh, I'll go there on election day, and then election day it's closed. So
it's not there. Yeah.
No, it's not there. That's it. Or it's there, but it's closed.
Yeah.
So which is most unwelcome to people, of course. So consistency, we're going to keep them all open. But as you can imagine, for those sort of all up 1,750 plus venues that we've got, and we're locking that down now. As you can imagine, a lot of them we work with Department of Education. There'll be schools and things like that, but also a lot of them, as usual, will be council-owned or controlled venues, and we really value that relationship. We want to collaborate even better than we ever have with local councils, just to make sure we've got venues that are fit for the job and that meet people where they are.
What can councils do for you there that perhaps you haven't had in the past?
Yeah, it's always difficult getting all of the venues we want and at the standard that we want. Now, of course, what we do know, and this is one of the great things that we appreciate working with local councils on the footprint, is that, of course, local councils out there are in an environment where they've also been constantly trying to upgrade their venues, make sure they're accessible, in some cases, depending on where they are, making sure there's parking, particularly from people who live with disability, and so on. So that's really important to us. Mostly really what we want from local councils is just that relationship. If we've got that good relationship where when one of my staff talks to one of your staff, we both approach that with a perspective of, right, how can we solve this problem?
Yeah.
And pretty much always that that is what we have, and we really value that.
Excellent. So those conversations obviously are ongoing. It must be a challenge to run state elections in an attendance voting method and then have to pivot to postal elections, which all council elections are now. What sort of challenges does that present for you in the way you gear up and resource these elections?
Yeah, look, for us, it's just a different model, of course, but of course we're also experienced in both of those models. So they are quite different. For us, obviously, the footprint is quite different. I mean, a particular challenge with postal voting for local councils is that under the law, there is no in-person voting. We don't have voting centres for local council elections. That is the law, and that's what we're responding to. Or that is the law with the minister's direction, which the minister has under the Act. So what that means is that sometimes there's some confusion, because of course we do have venues, again usually in cooperation with local councils, where people can go to nominate as a candidate, where people can go to ask for a replacement ballot, for example. Let's say they've not received theirs in the post, or they have received it and they've lost it, or it's they've filled it out and they'd like to change their minds. All of that, we can account for all of that, but it does mean that we have a physical venue. And of course, then you get some people who think of that as the same thing as a voting centre. So in other words, well, on the last day, the Friday, I'll just go there at 4:00 and queue up and get marked off the roll. Not entirely how it works, but of course we've got to be ready for that. So one of the big challenges in the difference is the awareness of the voters to know what is actually offered and how they can most conveniently take part in that. The other big difference, of course, is that as I'm sure the local council representatives listening to this will be well aware of, is that under law we recover the cost of local council elections from the relevant local government. We are very aware of the very tight fiscal environment that most councils are in. The demand for services keeps increasing, dare I say, much faster than the rate of at which revenue can be raised. And so for us, we are conscious of that, and we always try and obviously keep that cost down as much as we can.
Sven, before we get off state and look at those by-elections just briefly, a lot of councillors we're aware of already have indicated that they'll be standing as candidates. What sort of message would you have for those councillors that they need to be aware of in terms of obligations under the Act, and perhaps some common misconceptions you could clear up?
Yeah, sure. So certainly, sitting councillors can nominate. They can stand for election in the state, in the lower or upper house. The main point is that should they be elected, they basically can't take their seat without resigning their councillor position. Of course, that's the main thing. There are obviously other requirements in terms of nominations. There's quite a lot of those. Probably my key message there for any councillor that is considering standing for the state election is have a look at our website. We have so much information on this that that will answer most and hopefully in many cases all of your questions. So the resource is there. Please avail yourself of it, because there are some tricky things in there. And the other thing we need them to be aware of is we administer in the case of the state election, we administer the Electoral Act here in Victoria, which is about state matters. There is, of course, the Local Government Act as well, which, while that in this case is not directly relevant to the election as such, of course, while you're still a councillor, there are things, obligations in that act that continue to apply to you. So again, making sure that you're aware of that, that's really important.
And we're aware of legislation that might bring in some new requirements that, as I understand it, won't apply until after this state election has been concluded. So that might be cause for another discussion down the track, Sven, as those obligations change.
Always happy to do it.
Yeah. So if a councillor gets elected to state level, it's going to trigger a vacancy and a process. And depending on the structure of the council, it could be a countback, could be a by-election. You'd obviously be watching that very closely in terms of how you resource the work that that might create for you.
Yes, absolutely, and of course, recently we had the state by-election in the seat of Nepean, and the successful candidate there was previously a councillor who then had to resign, and we've subsequently successfully run that by-election. So yes, whether it's a by-election or a countback depends entirely on the structure of the council. If it's a single councillor ward, it has to be a by-election; it cannot be a countback. If it's, on the other hand, a multi-councillor ward or an unsubdivided council, then we can simply do a countback where we look at obviously all the votes cast last time that seat was contested. It's a bit like a Senate recount, if you will, and where we then sort of allocate preferences accordingly and declare someone else elected. Now, in that case, the big difference, of course, or big differences between a by-election and a countback is it's quite substantial. A countback for us is very straightforward. We need to undertake some statutory advertisement and so forth, but then ultimately it's really a system that does the calculation based on the data that we've already got from the last election. Very straightforward, very little cost to the council. Whereas a by-election really generally runs to six figures because it is a new council election, albeit for one ward, and again we realise the cost of that to council. What we've tried, well, what we have done. A lot of this became more acute with the changes in 2020 that resulted in a lot more councils being comprised of single councillor wards. We modelled that and we thought, well, we're going to have more by-elections generally across local councils. What we have done, rather than simply saying when we receive a notification of a vacancy that we then start the process, we actually say, well, we're going to receive many of these regularly. We now have what we call sort of our seasons of by-elections, where we break the year down into various pieces or various periods and say, well, for a notification of a vacancy in this period, here's the timeline, it's already set. What that allows us to do is actually run a bunch of by-elections concurrently and reduce the cost. We're actually doing that at the moment.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense in terms of why it's been playing out the way it has. There has been some feedback from within the sector. What's that done is created a long gap in some cases between the vacancy occurring and it being filled. Some months in some cases. How do you respond to that criticism, if you like, and whether that needs to be looked at more closely?
Yeah, look, the criticism is based on some substance. In other words, with having these periods of resignation and by-election periods, it does mean that depending on where in that nomination period a vacancy is notified to us, if it's notified very early on in a period, it does mean that a person can wait or a council can wait quite a long time, or longer than may otherwise be the case for a by-election. But we had the choice. We had the choice of either doing this, which saves substantial money and cost, or alternatively, we could have stayed with the old model, which basically means, right, we receive the application, we start on the normal time frame from there on. But that basically means that, for example, at the moment, we're doing, I think it's 5 local government by-elections right now, as well as a couple of countbacks. And they're not all in the same season. Some of them are in different seasons, so to speak, but they're all being run by a team that we've got here that can basically run the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a particular time frame in parallel. Okay, so that has some real economies of scale. So we had the option of doing that. The downside of that is, in some cases, it will be a longer period before the by-election is completed. The upside, of course, is substantial cost savings, and we've taken the latter.
Yeah, okay, that's really good to know. Before we wrap up, if there's one thing you'd want councils and elected members to know about where you're at in this particular part of the election cycle, what would that be?
Yeah, look, we're more ready than ever this far out from an election, but we have to be, because the election is going to be bigger and more complex than ever. But we're absolutely ready for it. What I would encourage potential candidates to do, as I said, look at our website. It's a wealth of information. All of your questions should be answered there, and we encourage people to take advantage of that.
Sven, always good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for your time, and all the best with the busy months ahead for you.
Thank you, Chris. Always a pleasure.
Sven Bluemmel, the Victorian Electoral Commissioner here on VLGA Connect. Well, 2 years out from Moira Shire's return to elected representation, the council is in a rare position in Victorian local government, the only one under administration at the moment, and with a CEO tasked with rebuilding governance from the ground up before voters get to have their say again in October or November, actually, of 2028. So joining me now is Matthew Morgan, CEO at Moira. Matt has 2 decades of experience in local government, being the CEO at 2 other councils in his career, and he's been at Moira for 2.5 years, steering the council through the aftermath of a commission of inquiry. Matt, welcome to VLGA Connect. Great to have you here.
Yeah, g'day, Chris. Thank you, and it's great to be here with you as well.
So thank you for your time. As I say, you're in a unique position there in Moira at the moment. You took on the role early 2024, stepping into a council that had just been through a commission of inquiry and dismissal. What made you put your hand up for this particular job?
Chris, interesting question. Look, I think first and foremost, professionally, you always look at an organisation and opportunities. And looking at Moira is no different to any other organisation or opportunity. You've got to be aware of the context and the past and what's transpired. But more importantly, and this has been true with every opportunity I've taken over my career, is you look at the current leadership and you look at their plans for the future, and then you've got to understand whether or not you can add value, sufficient value, to how they get there. And I think that was what intrigued me about Moira. Then having a conversation, obviously through the recruitment process, seemed like we had pretty strong alignment. It seemed like I had a fair bit to offer from my experience that could contribute to taking Moira forwards. And then personally, also aligned with the opportunity to come back to Victoria. So we've still got family in Victoria. We've been in South Australia for 15 years. So it was a good opportunity to get back while the kids are still young and still be around grandparents and things like that. So personally, certainly some benefits there, but professionally, just looked like a strong alignment of what value I could bring to the table and the direction that the administrators wanted to take the organisation in terms of restoring governance pre-2028.
You led 2 councils in South Australia, didn't you? What sort of cross-border observations do you make as you made that move back into Victoria?
Yeah, so I was at Corinda, East Murray in the Murray Valley, and then City of Port Lincoln before coming back across to Moira. I think that the biggest transition that I can see, Chris, over the last 15 years, and having been at Hepburn Shire in the mid-2000s, which is where my local government journey started, and then going to South Australia for 15 years and then coming back. The biggest change that I can see in the sector, and there's always little nuances between the Act and how things operate and play out between state to state, but the biggest change has been rate capping and the introduction of rate capping here in Victoria. And I think that's certainly, we did a lot of work around financial sustainability in South Australia. I think we now need to adapt that. And that's certainly something I've had to get my head across in Victoria, how the rate capping system works, but then also how we get ahead of that, which has meant a really strong look at service delivery frameworks, how we can do what we need to do when we know that CPI and cost increases are far outstripping the rate cap. But we also have to be conscious of that impact on our ratepayers and our communities. So that's been one of the biggest challenges, I think, coming back into that rate cap environment. And I think there are mechanisms available to us, but it does require the need for some pretty robust conversations with the community about what they expect of councils and how councils can fund that and those services moving forwards. So that's probably the biggest observation I've made coming back into Victoria.
Question without notice. As we record this, there are reports out there that the government might be looking at an overhaul of the rate cap framework, and parts of the sector have been calling for a review for a long time. The suggestion being that there might be a carve out to allow increased rates to cover increased staffing costs. Would you support that sort of process?
It needs to be based on the service framework. And I think if you've got a robust council plan that's been road tested with the community, you've had conversations with the community around the services they expect you to deliver and how you're going to deliver those, then there's a cost to that. And then I guess it's working out the difference between the cost and the revenue you've currently got. And if that requires a change to the system, whether it's a rate cap exemption or whether there's some carve outs for that, then certainly that's something that needs to happen in order to facilitate sustainability of councils. I wouldn't specifically tie that to staffing costs, though. It is broader than that in terms of asset maintenance renewal. That is the big one, particularly for regional councils like Moira, and there are many others like us, where we've got a lot of distributed assets. We don't have one single community of interest. So we've got assets spread right across the district. So 6, 7 swimming pools, 9 transfer stations, 5 council depots, and 4 communities that are growing that all want services and have expectations of what they're provided. So the challenge is real. It is around how we fund that gap between where we are at the moment in terms of revenue and where we need to be to continue to deliver those services.
I have to say, Matt, I've been enjoying your posts on LinkedIn, your thought leadership pieces about the CEO role, about leadership in general. The leadership challenge that you've got at Moira is a bit different to most CEOs in the state, in fact, all at the moment, given that you're charged with rebuilding trust after a governance failure. Do you bring a different leadership philosophy under those circumstances than you might otherwise, do you think?
Certainly, it's slightly different, and I think it's different with the model of administration in the sense of, with no elected members, people in the community miss the opportunity to have that conversation at the pub on a Friday night. So I think the first thing is it means our administrators, so we've got Graham and Susan, they're very, very committed to Moira and to the community. It puts a lot of pressure on them to be out and to be visible and to be engaging with the community, which they've been doing a fantastic job of. Even things like Thursday night footy training sessions with community groups and organisations. But as I've said to our team here, it also puts a little bit more focus on us needing to engage and lean into some of those conversations, which would usually happen with elected members, just so that we're building those connections with the community. I think the second part of that is it's very easy to make commitments and not be able to follow through on those commitments. And the thing I've found over the last 10 years, particularly sitting in the CEO seat, is you are better off having a conversation with members of the community, being very real with them up front about what you can and can't deliver, rather than setting expectations that are unachievable. And I think people appreciate a very honest reflection on what you can and can't do, rather than either no response or a commitment that you then can't full through on. So I think that's sort of the philosophy that we've sort of been bringing here to Moira over the last few years. Very happy to say with the community satisfaction survey results that we received this year, that we've seen an 8-point increase in our overall community satisfaction. And that's right across the board. I think the statewide increase was about 4 points average. So that's double the statewide increase. So I think the work that we're doing as a team, that is all of our staff as well as the administrators, is starting to pay dividends in terms of that communication, the transparency, but also the very real conversations we have to have with our community about setting realistic expectations.
Yeah. That's an excellent result. Congratulations. What
Thank you.
changes between now and the end of 2028, do you think, as you return to elected representation, about the way you approach the role and the organisation prepares?
Hey, look, I think there's a few things that we're doing internally. I think there's no doubt that with the period that Moira went through, there's a lot of systems and processes and governance internally that need to be restored, and we're certainly on that journey. Everything from the maturity of our OH&S system through to our policy procedure frameworks, through to things like our computer systems, and just making sure that staff have got the tools that they need. But in terms of preparing for governance in terms of an elected body, we've rolled out the community leadership program, which we developed here at Moira. And I think we've had the 3 cohorts go through that program. So about 42 people have gone through the community leadership program. Right. And that's really part of building capability within community members, getting them exposed to, I guess, civic life and civic duties. They may put their hands up for council. They may put their hand up to be on other committees within the community, but we're hoping that we will generate a lot of interest in people participating in civic life, in a sense of council participation. I know we've certainly had a few people from that program that have gone on to do some remarkable things. Stacey is one of the, we'll just mention Stacey. Stacey is one of the participants from the first program who's gone on to create a group called Women of the Murray. And that has just blossomed over the last 18 months. And they've got a membership of about 60 or 70 women from right across the region. And it's that sort of empowerment that we want to give people within the community before the elections, that they may think about then how their voice gets represented and whether they stand for elections in 2028. So I think the community leadership program, the youth council's been reactivated, bringing young people into the discussion as well. And the final piece for us will be the electoral representation review, which is understanding what the model of representation looks like in 2028. Will it be an unsubdivided district? Will it be a district that's divided into wards? And then if it is divided into wards, what is the level of representation within each of those wards? So still a little bit of work to do on how that model will work coming into 2028. But we're really, really confident in the fact that we will have a model that serves Moira well into the future, but we will have some very, very capable community leaders that want to put their hand up come election time.
Excellent. And what you say about community leadership development programs is spot on. I think history shows us Brimbank, South Gippsland, Whittlesea, Casey, all of those councils, it occurs to me, that were under administration ran those programs and saw lots of people stepping up. Do you think other councils that aren't going through a governance crisis should do more in that community leadership space as well?
I think nationwide, and certainly in South Australia as well, we see at times in regional areas, when it comes around to council elections, it is hard to fill all the seats in some councils. And I think we saw that at the last South Australian election, where there was vacancies, I think, in about 15 or 20 councils. So I think there is a broader campaign, and I know that the statewide associations run those campaigns and councils run those campaigns to generate interest, but that work can certainly start earlier in the form of community leadership programs. So I think investment in these programs really is an investment in future leaders.
I want to get back to you in just a moment. Looking back, there was some conjecture or contention at the time of Moira being placed under administration that I think it was 5.5 years or thereabouts was just too long and you wouldn't need that amount of time. Do you think in hindsight that was a good decision to provide that amount of time?
Knowing what I know now, 2 years into the role, I think having administrators as opposed to an elected council provides the freedom and the space that I need as a CEO to really rebuild organisation systems and processes. And I know that certainly part of your role as a CEO is understanding and working with an elected council. That consumes a lot of the time as a CEO. So I think that the space of 4 years or 5.5 years, but the 4 years since I've started through to 2028 is certainly necessary to get the organisation into a well-functioning administration. We've got a lot of great people. We've just got to get the systems and processes right around that so that we're ready to support an elected council when they come back in. And that's probably the most thing, is we need to set ourselves up for success so that we can set the council up for success in the future.
And we wish you and the team every success as you work towards that very important date. A little bit about you, perhaps, before we wrap up. I think I read that you started out as an IT support officer for 2 days a week at a small shire, one that's been in the news recently, Hepburn Shire. Is that right? And when you started out there, did you foresee the sort of career path ahead of you that you've actually had to date?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, and look, certainly started out. So I grew up in central Victoria and went to high school in Daylesford and then to university in Ballarat, and had the opportunity to pick up a part-time job at the local council. And my grandma, before she passed away, always said to me, if you get a job in council, it'll open up opportunities for you. And as a young person, you don't really take that much notice of that.
Smart lady, though. Smart lady.
Yeah. But yeah, it turned out to be very true. Yeah. And I think as I say, when we talk to our staff here and we do our own leadership programs, councils are such a diverse organisation. And if you haven't worked in a council, you won't understand how diverse it is in terms of the functions and services you provide to your community. And particularly working in IT, you get to see all aspects of council. So part of that job, putting computers on desks, you get to work with every department from environmental health through to planning, through to finance, through to community, through to rates, through to the works depots. So you get to understand everyone's roles right across the council and just the diversity of those roles. But you also see, I guess, the challenges that each of those departments have and how systems, solutions, and problems can actually generate better outcomes. So I think my love for council life really came from that exposure through the IT department. From there, my role expanded to full-time, as it does, and then you take opportunities as they arise. And I think at Hepburn, before I left Hepburn, I was manager of governance and information. I oversaw customer services, economic development, tourism, records management, property management, and IT. And I think that's part of the advice I would give to people if they're coming up through the ranks, so to speak, would be to take opportunities. Certainly master your domain and be the master of your domain, but certainly take opportunities and broaden your, immerse yourself in what the organisation does and the diversity of the organisation, because it will help you as you get higher up the tree to understand the context of all the different departments and what they're doing.
I received very similar advice early in my career from a mentor, and it's just struck me today how similar our career paths on the way to being a council CEO was, because I had IT and governance and comms and all those sorts of things. And it really is it's a big grounding on the scope of things that councils do and manage, which a lot of people don't realise. And I wonder how you feel about the state of the sector. There's a lot of pressure on executive turnover, succession needs, etc. Where do you think we're at as a sector and bringing through that next generation of leaders?
The sector's delivering a lot of good results for communities with not a lot of resourcing. I think that's probably where we're at the moment, and certainly the discussion from all the representative bodies will be around. You'll hear a lot of discussion around financial sustainability, around the 1% of federal taxation revenue for the financial assistance grants. We are operating in resource-constrained environments. We are critical for our communities in terms of what we do and how we provide it. The resourcing and the skill sets that councils need, particularly in rural and regional Australia, is challenging. It is challenging at times to attract people to the regions, but then keep them in the regions. So I think that is something that we do need to look at as a sector moving forwards, how we grow our own, how we encourage more people to live in rural areas, but also how we develop people who are already in rural areas to take on some of these roles. And some of these roles we're talking about are technical roles, whether it's planning, whether it's engineering, but some of them are just general leadership roles as well. Yeah. It is a lot and having been through that process, when you look at emerging leaders coming up through the sector, there are certainly opportunities if they wanted to take them in regional Australia. There's small councils, whether it's a director role, general manager role, whether it's a CEO role. Excellent experience. It will give you grounding in the whole of organisation, but it is challenging, and it can be all-consuming if you allow it to be. Yes. And rural Australia, I've always lived in regional Australia and rural Australia. But if you're a CEO in a small rural council, people know where you live, and the office hours don't determine when they contact you. And I can still remember many occasions where people have turned up on the front door at Saturday night just to let me know that there's a wandering dog or something like that, or they're expecting the blocked drain or something like that. So. Yeah. So it is all consuming, but I think the biggest thing moving forwards is understanding how do we get people and skilled people into regional councils across Australia, and that's a challenge right across the country.
And what's your view on the influence and the impact of AI in the future?
Yeah, look, it's the next evolution, isn't it? And I think if we reflect back on when computers were first introduced, then the internet was first introduced, and now we're seeing that next step change come through with AI. I think there's a lot of buzz and a lot of hype around AI, but I think we've got to be really cautious around how we use it and how we implement it. There are certainly going to be some great opportunities, and I think. For me, there's personal use of AI as professionals, and that's really about skilling people up within our organisation, and even myself and other leaders on how we use it as a personal productivity tool, with safeguards in there. So do the doing, and expand your capacity by eliminating the time that you're spending on doing tasks, but make sure you're retaining ownership of the decision-making process that comes out of these things. Through to, I guess, agentic AI and how we embed that in the underlying systems. So I think there's huge opportunity for AI to expand capacity without needing to expand workforces. One of the commitments that we've made here, and I've certainly made this here at Moira, is that we want people to explore AI in a safe environment. So we've got some guardrails up. We also want to make sure that there's no one left behind. So we know that younger people potentially will be more familiar with new technologies. We want to make sure that the whole workforce is brought along on that journey and that discussion, and that no one's fearful of what it might mean. And I've made the commitment here at Moira that no one will lose their job as a result of AI. And with that freedom, that we will provide a safe place where people can explore how to use AI to create efficiencies in the work that they do on a daily basis. And I think that's really where it's at in terms of understanding how it can enable us to do more with the limited resources that we've got.
And a lot of what you say has been echoed by that LG Pro Whitehorse City Council-led study research piece that just came out recently that I'm sure you're aware of and have no doubt digested. Matthew, it's been great to talk to you. I get the sense we could talk about a lot more, so maybe we'll have to book a return visit. But thanks for your time and your candour on what's a genuinely unusual chapter for Moira Shire as you head towards elected representation in 2028, and we'll be watching your progress very closely there.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for your time.
Matthew Morgan with us, CEO of Moira Shire Council here on VLGA Connect. Well, that's just about all we have for you this week. A quick plug from the VLGA for the Year 2 Councillor Professional Development Program. It's been developed with councillor needs, cost and time efficiency in mind, and the VLGA is offering flexible delivery options, from fast-paced 1-hour online modules to more intensive half-day sessions that allow participants to take a deeper dive into key aspects of the councillor role. If you'd like a program designed around the specific needs of your council and delivered in a format that suits your schedule, contact the VLGA. You can also view the full Year 2 Councillor Professional Development Prospectus on the VLGA website. That's our show for this week. Thank you for watching and listening. We're back with more next week. Until then, bye for now.